And you're live.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the special called meeting of the Education Professional Standards Board. I will now call the meeting to order and will begin by reading the EPSB's mission statement. The Education Professional Standards Board, in full collaboration and cooperation with its education partners, promotes high levels of student achievement by establishing and enforcing rigorous professional standards for preparation, certification, and responsible and ethical behavior of all professional educators in Kentucky. Sharon Chesser joins us today as Board Secretary. Ms. Chesser, thank you for joining us. Please call the roll.
Amanda Ellis.
Amanda Ellis, present.
Susan Brewer. Diane Berry.
Diane Berry, present.
Elijah Edwards.
Elijah Edwards, present.
Kathy Gunn.
Kathy Gunn, present.
Tracy Hunt. Jacqueline Mayfield. Corin Murphy. Meredith Pittman. Amber Snell.
Amber Snell, present.
Wade Stanfield. Jillian Vasquez Heilig.
Present.
Timothy Wooster. Vice Chair Weedman.
Sarah Weedman, present.
Chair Mitchell.
Justin Mitchell, present.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Chesser. This morning, we have one action item to review. This item is presented to the board for action and will require a motion and a vote. It is presented by Cassie Trueblood.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning on short notice to review this proposed amendment. The action item before you is a proposed agency amendment to 16 KAR 9110. This is the regulation that the board has set forth, setting the standards for the option 9 alternative route to certification. At the October meeting, the EPSB did approve a suggested substitute to this regulation, and the following day, the regulation with the substitute went before the Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee, also referred to as ARS. This committee is made up entirely of legislators and is charged with reviewing all administrative regulations that are filed with the Legislative Research Commission. All regulations must pass through this committee before they become effective. At the ARS meeting, the legislators had some concerns about the ability of our small rural districts to meet the requirements contained in the regulation around engaging with multiple student populations, especially since some of our smaller rural districts do not include all of the listed populations in their student enrollment. The committee noted that option 9 route was created by the legislature as a grow your own program to meet the needs of those participating districts. To try to address the concerns that the committee put forth, I expressed to that committee that this language simply mirrored the language that we already have in place for our traditional route candidates, that is in our traditional educator preparation program, and that currently all of our traditional candidates are able to meet these requirements with the assistance of our educator preparation providers. I also informed the committee that KRS 161028-1N provides the board with the authority to waive an administrative regulation in extraordinary circumstances. And the board has, in fact, waived field experience hours, most recently in the case of COVID, where it was the case that just our candidates simply could not meet those hours due to district closures. However, this did not ease the legislators' concerns. They still shared those same concerns, and that though waiver was possibility, it was not enough to allow them to go ahead and approve the regulation as is. They asked to defer the regulation to review the language. And following the meeting, the ARS co-chairs reached out through staff to reiterate their concerns and also propose that the EPSB either make the language permissive around the student populations, or that they simply delete the language altogether. In our discussions with the co-chairs, we did express that it was not the intention of the EPSB to limit this route or discourage districts from pursuing it. However, any language would ultimately have to meet the needs of Kentucky's students, our future teachers, our districts, as well as our colleges and universities. We also informed the co-chairs about the requirements placed on our colleges and university educator preparation programs around diversity, especially in the accreditation process in the standards at both the state and national level. In these discussions, we did arrive at the language that you have before you in the agency amendment. The agency amendment is included on page 4 of your materials. However, the second page of the staff note, or the page before the agency amendment, puts that language before you in a little more user-friendly format. LRC formatting is not always the easiest to navigate. But the only portion of the regulation that the proposed amendment will change is section 3(1)A of the regulation. All other portions would remain unchanged. This portion that we are focusing on is the part of the field experience hours. And under the original language, option 9 candidates were required to engage with diverse populations of students, which include students from a minimum of 2 different ethnic or cultural groups, of which the candidate would not be considered a member, students from different socioeconomic groups, English language learners, students with disabilities, and students from across elementary, middle school, and secondary grade levels. The amended language before you does still require engagement with multiple student populations and specifies that multiple student populations may, so that is where the permissive piece comes in, may include those same populations that I just read. So those are still listed and included in the language. All of those same groups remain in the amended language, but the language does make it permissive as to what populations are included in multiple student populations. And if the language ended there, it would be up to the option 9 providers to make the determination as to what populations are included. However, the amendment also goes on to include what is listed as number 2. A candidate shall engage with the student populations represented in the student enrollment of the district where the candidate is completing the residency. So the language in number 2 requires that if student populations listed in number 1 are represented in the student enrollment for that district, then the candidate is required to engage with that population. So for example, in your larger districts, all of the listed populations are going to be represented in the student enrollment. Therefore, engagement with multiple student populations would still include engaging with all of the listed populations. However, in a small rural district where we see that there are 0 English language learners in the student enrollment, then multiple student populations would not require engaging with English language learners. But this is where number 3 would then come in to allow an option 9 provider to offer opportunities to engage with multiple student populations outside of the district where the candidate is completing the residency. So our providers would still be able to offer that opportunity when a student population is not represented in the district. Our districts will have to partner with a college or university with an approved educator preparation program to offer an option 9 route. Our colleges and universities do have mechanisms built into their programs to ensure engagement with multiple student populations. We have heard from some of our institutions that they have these sort of field trips when the multiple student populations are limited in their region, where they will go to another district where those populations are available to encourage engagement and to allow that. This regulation would still allow that to continue, and nothing in the proposed amendment will require them to change those programs. Now, the R's co-chairs have indicated that they approve the proposed language and would approve the regulation with this amendment. They've also expressed that their hope is that the EPSB will approve the amendment, but ultimately it is your decision as a board about how to proceed. And as your staff, we do want to provide you with the options that are available to you. So first, you do have the ability to approve the agency amendment before you. If that is the will of the board, what will happen is that I will file the amendment with the Legislative Research Commission today, as is, and the amendment and regulation will appear before ours next Wednesday. Because we have received confirmation from the co-chairs that they approve this language, this course of action is the best guarantee that I can give you that the regulation will complete the legislative process and become effective. You could also vote to approve the agency amendment with revisions. This would mean that the filed amendment would deviate from the language that the co-chairs have indicated that they approve. So I cannot guarantee that revised amendment would be approved by ours. But after this meeting, I would work with LRC staff to amend the agency amendment and then would work to get that filed today before 4:30 because that is the deadline for the November meeting, with the hope that that would then be able to appear before ours in November as well. The legislative process has very strict timelines, but it is possible that you could defer consideration of the amendment. This regulation was filed with an emergency regulation on July 13th, and that emergency regulation is currently in effect, but only remains in effect for 270 days or until the ordinary becomes effective. The latest that the emergency regulation would remain in effect, therefore, is April 9th. And a regulation that is before ours in December, so if you deferred for 1 month, has an expected effective date of April 4th. So that would be cutting it very close there. And we do know that if you defer, there is always the possibility for additional things to come up in the process and continue to delay that regulation, which could result in there being a period of time where there is no regulation in effect around option 9. You could also deny the agency amendment and direct staff to proceed back to ours with the regulation as is. In that scenario, because the members of the committee have already indicated concerns with the language, it is very likely that they would find that regulation deficient. If they find a regulation deficient, it is then transmitted to the governor, who would have to, or with a request for the governor to determine if the regulation should be withdrawn, meaning it doesn't become effective, that it be amended at a legislative committee meeting to conform with the deficiency, or that it become effective in spite of that finding of deficiency. So if you chose this course of action, we could request that the governor determine that the regulation become effective over the committee's determination of deficiency. We don't know for certain what course of action the governor would choose, so I cannot make any guarantees about that. However, it is possible that in that case, he could still approve the regulation. However, there is the possibility in this course of action that if that were the case, that the legislature could legislate around that action, that they could limit the board's authority in this. But there are multiple things that could happen, and I will note that that is probably the riskiest of the options available to you. So in attempting to work with the legislature to find acceptable language, we were working to avoid any conflict that could result in them legislating this situation and filing legislation that would take the authority away from the EPSB. You are an independent board with the authority and responsibility for setting the standards to obtain and maintain a teaching certificate in the state of Kentucky. However, that power is not absolute. It does come from the legislature. They have given you that power in statute, and they do have the ability to amend and in some cases take away that power if they feel that the EPSB is not honoring the legislative intent. So staff has recommended the course of action of approving the agency amendment because we do feel that is the way in which we can ensure that your regulation makes it through the process and does become effective without drawing additional legislative scrutiny. Again, it is ultimately the board's decision on how to proceed, and we will carry out the action that you choose. So at this time, if you have any questions about the agency amendment that is proposed, about the R's meeting, or about the options available to you, I am available for any questions.
You want us to speak up or raise hands, or how do you want us to respond?
Go ahead, Julian. You have the floor. Great,
thank you so much, Chair Mitchell. Julian Vasquez Heilig, UK. So, I was in a meeting recently with the Dean of Engineering, and one of the interesting things that he said was that we want to understand what the problem is, and then for the solution to be tailored to that problem. Now, we all, I think, are very aware of the growing diversity in Kentucky. I think almost a quarter of students in the state are now students of color. Nationally, majority minority. And so as we're training teachers, and we take that responsibility very seriously at UK as an EPP, we want to be able to have our teachers be prepared to teach students who are diverse. So my concern, I feel like there's a couple of tweaks here that we could consider that would get at the problem, but still address the changing demographics and the desires that we have for new teachers. My concern, and I don't mean to sound lawyerly here, is that by making the regulation more permissive, it really defines away diversity. But I think there's some more complex fix, but I also think that there's some really easy fixes. If we changed one or two words, I think that it would give a little bit more weight to the commitment that the Commonwealth has made to students of color and to communities of color. I am aware that the Kentucky NAACP has some concerns with the way the wording is correctly, and I can forward that letter to the board from the president of the NAACP. I think that, so what does that mean in practice? I think one possibility, potentially the easiest, is, the change here really is in one, changing the word diverse to multiple. That's one of the big changes here. Now, we might think that two would cover that because maybe a Louisville or Lexington is going to be more diverse than some other parts of the state, so two might cover it. And so I think one potential change could be in three. So we want to encourage folks who are option 9 providers, and it says may, and as we know, may legally is one of the sort of wishiest washiest words. And I think we should really be encouraging, So one, if we simply say an option 9 provider should offer opportunities rather than may offer opportunities to engage with student populations. Now, that's not shall, but that is more encouragement for that to happen because, again, the demographics are changing, and we want teachers to be able to teach anywhere across the Commonwealth and be able to step into those roles. And then also in 3, we use the word multiple. Now, I understand that we've used the word multiple to replace diverse in part 1, but I think it's a reasonable approach to engage with diverse student populations. I understand that the legislature wants to change the word diverse in number 1, or that's what the agreed to change is. But I do think that we want to do our best to prepare educators to work with students of all different backgrounds. And of course, multiple is defined not only by ethnic and cultural groups and racial groups, but also socioeconomic groups, English language learners, ELLs, students with disabilities, etc. So here's my point. I think we could tweak the language a little bit so that I think everybody could feel comfortable that we're not defining away diversity here.
Chair Mitchell, may I provide a few comments in regards to that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez-Heilig, for those comments and for that proposal. I do want to note that unfortunately, should is not a word that the Legislative Research Commission will allow us to put in a regulation. The regulation language needs to be may or shall. That was actually one of the issues that we ran into with the option 7 language at the last meeting as well. So unfortunately, including should would not make it through LRC. We would not be able to file the regulation with that. In regards to the difference in multiple student populations and diverse populations. So in the previous language, diverse populations was specifically listed as those same categories that are included as may include multiple student populations. Now, again, where, as Dr. Vasquez-Heilig pointed out correctly, that is may in number 1. But number 2 does require that if there are any of those student populations represented in the enrollment in the district, then the candidate would be required to engage in that. That is the language before you. One potential suggestion here may be, and again, any language that deviates from the language that is approved, we can't guarantee that that is what the Legislative Research Commission will approve. But a possibility is looking at that number 2 language, that an option 9 provider, a candidate shall engage, and then we could further clarify, shall engage with all student populations listed in subparagraph 1 that are represented in the student enrollment for the district where the candidate is completing the residency. Now, again, I would maintain that the language as it's currently written does require that already, and that has been agreed upon by the legislature, but this could further clarify that and put that into the language as well. Again, with that, we can't guarantee it, but we could present that to the legislature that is the reason for that.
Ms. Gunn?
Sorry. Hey, thank you. I like the direction that things are going in with the conversation, but it makes me think of unintended consequences. Like, say there are 2 children of color in that entire district, so every single candidate that's going through option 9 has to work with those 2 students. So I just want to make sure that we're not creating an unintended consequence. So that's just the first thing that I thought. Well, that was the thing I thought about from what you just said. But I also had a revision myself that I had taken issue with. It's not a big one. Well, it is. It says that they're going to be K through 12 certified. And if you're going to be K through 12 certified, why did we cross out what used to be 5? If you're going to be K through 12, then you should work with elementary, middle, and secondary grade levels. Otherwise, then their certification should mirror what populations they did their field hours in, unless they apply for a waiver or some exceptional circumstance, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Chair Mitchell, may I
Of course.
clarify on that? So, Ms. Gunn, in regards to the language that you're discussing is in a separate section of the regulation around the student teaching portion of that, and that was actually approved by the board at the October board meeting. So the board has already approved that language around the student teaching and removing the requirement that their third year of the experience be in all of those different classrooms. Part of the reason for that was the feedback that was received during this process about the employment portion and how these candidates did have to be employed for the entirety of the year in a position, and that moving them around in that employment in the third year was potentially going to be a barrier for the districts in having them there, especially as looking towards some work around the apprenticeship routes that this has been intended for. However, you will see in the language before you in the engagement with multiple student populations, it is still requiring them to engage with all of the populations during their field experience hours. So students from across elementary, middle school, and secondary grades, they will be required to engage with them during those field experience hours. In the third year, they would have to be in an employment that is consistent with their certificate. They just would not have to continue to change classrooms throughout that employment in the third year.
So,
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I just don't, so that language is elsewhere that they still have to engage with middle, high, and secondary grade levels? Is that what I'm understanding? I'm sorry.
Yes, that
students at my door, my light turned off.
Public education.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. This in those field experience hours, it does state under the engagement with multiple student populations, 1E does include students from across elementary, middle school, and the secondary grade levels.
Miss Ellis, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you. Cassie, I just have a quick question. And you all, I know this is frustrating, and everything Cassie's saying is true, whether it makes sense or not. It's really crazy. So Cassie, my question, and I should know the answer, but I don't. In our other options, like with the other alternative options, is this the same language that we've used in like 6, that I know you've already talked about 7, that has those same requirements, or how does that work? Sorry.
So no, the field experience requirements, that is contained in 16 KAR 5040. That is the language that we mirrored, and that is only required in our traditional and in our, so our traditional programs. So our traditional undergrad, traditional MAT programs. Your option 6 programs, in that scenario, the candidate is employed in a position throughout the entirety of their program. And so in that, it does not have these specified requirements around engagement with multiple student populations. Now, our educator preparation partners, they do have those built into their program because, again, that they have to meet those requirements around diversity that we see in the CAPE requirements and the AQEP requirements, those standards for accreditation. And so while we don't mandate that, they are ensuring that in some fashion, which in option 9, again, you do have to partner with an educator preparation provider. And so the belief is that our programs would still continue to offer those opportunities as they have in their other programs. And nothing in this language would require them to change their process or would limit their ability to require engagement with diverse populations. One of the concerns in leaving it to the legislature is the possibility of finding language in statute later on that does limit the ability of our EPPs to require engagement with multiple student populations.
I think that was
So
a
it
really
does still that. Oh, I'm sorry, Amber, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I think that was a really great clarification, because if I understood that correctly, if you're going through the educator prep programs, but not full-time employed as you would be as an MAT option 6 person, you were required to do these things. But if you are employed full-time, as you would be as an option 9 candidate, then that is already waived because you're employed full-time. Is that correct?
So I wouldn't use the term waived. It's not specified in the regulations. Again, it is left up to our providers to include that.
And
To
I
me,
think
it's-
that, Amber, I totally agree with you. That's why I wasn't for sure, because I'm not savvy on all the options. I should be, but I'm not. And the other thing to me that brings me a little bit of comfort is the expectation that the EPPs are going to fulfill regardless, because they know the work. They are the experts in the work, and there's the requirement even in their standards. So that gives me some comfort. And Cassie, it helps me to understand, I'm sorry, guys, that it's not overlooked, pushed away. It's going to happen. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
I really love the idea that Cassie came up with, where in 2 we just refer back to 1. I think that is more concrete than hope and trust.
Elon, or Mr. Edwards, do you have something?
Yeah, I just want to say, I know this isn't an ideal situation, but I do appreciate, Cassie, your clarification for us and your explanation of why the staff supports this. So I plan to support it as well.
So Chair Mitchell, I am hearing a few possibilities from our members here. So one, if you are wanting to approve the language as is, that motion would be to approve the agency amendment to 16 KAR 9110. Again, that is the way in which we can guarantee this. The deviation here, if the board, however, wants to approve the revised language, your motion would be to approve the agency amendment with the revision to subparagraph 2, in which case, as I stated before, we would work with the Legislative Research Commission today to get that filed as quickly as possible. There has not been a guarantee from the co-chairs that they would approve that language. There's not a notification that they wouldn't. However, we can't guarantee that language. We would present it to them as still honoring the intent behind the original language, but also ensuring closing of that loophole for our larger districts where these populations are already available, and we do want to ensure engagement. So those are the 2 potential motions.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion that we consider the very modest revision to number 2.
Okay. So I have a motion before the board. I'm just going to repeat that, Julian, so that you can, if it's wrong, let me know, someone. I have a motion before the board to approve the agency amendment with the revision to subparagraph 2. Is that worded correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Could you make the revision?
Cassie, could you restate what you said to add in section 2 or subsection 2?
Yes, so the language in subparagraph 2 currently states a candidate shall engage with the student populations represented in the student enrollment for the district where the candidate is completing the residency. So that is what the current language states. The revised language would state a candidate shall engage with all student populations listed in subparagraph 1 that are represented in the student enrollment for the district where the candidate is completing the residency.
And so that was the piece where I don't want us to have unintended consequences. And there is a statistic word that means statistically significant representation. I don't know what the word is because I'm not science, but some science person help me with that word, because if we insert that word, then we don't worry about those 2 having every single person doing option 9 calling them or trying to work with them.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Kathy. I don't think that the modest change would affect that concern, right? Because even without it, you could still have the concern that if you have two African American students, that they might ping those students all the time, right? It, I don't think statistically significant would be the right word. I think they used representative, right? Or do they use that? I have to look at the language.
The language does say represented in the student enrollment.
I mean, one of the things that I had tossed around in my head, and in the NAACP letter, is a limit of 20. But I don't know if I want to muddy the waters. But that's what it does say in the letter, that if you have less than 20 students, that it's understood that it might be difficult. But I don't want to muddy the waters, because I think that either way, with the specific amendment, you could still have that particular issue.
And Dr. Vasquez-Heilig and Ms. Gunn, to clarify with this language, yes, I do understand, Ms. Gunn, the concern that you have put forward. And I do think that in any scenario, it does allow for that as a potential course of action. Even if you have a large number of these different populations, it does still allow for a limited portion of those large populations to be utilized in meeting this. However, it also leaves open the possibility in number 3 that we are clarifying that it does not have to be met with just the populations in that district. It does allow for that engagement to happen with neighboring districts, with student populations that are even outside of the region. So that is where I do think 3 can be utilized by our districts and by our providers to alleviate that concern.
So the motion before the board by Dr. Vasquez-Heilig is to approve the agency amendment with the revision in subparagraph 2. Do I have a second?
I second the motion. This is
Thank you,
Amanda Ellis.
So the motion before the board is to approve agency amendments with the revision in subparagraph 2. Is there any discussion?
Cassie, do you have a gauge on the likelihood of this being approved by the 4 o'clock deadline?
So I do have the language in front of me, and it is as far as number of words and the formatting, it is a minor tweak to the formatted document. So as soon as we adjourn, I will email and persistently call the Legislative Research Commission individual that I have been working with to make sure that we have this properly formatted. And it really just involves me finalizing that with them and getting the right number of copies printed and then taking it slightly down the road to file with the commission. So again, because it is different, there is always possibilities associated with that I can't make guarantees on, but I will do my best and do believe that we can finalize that language to be filed today.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Chesser, please call the roll.
Amanda Ellis,
Amanda Ellis, yes.
Diane Berry,
Diane Berry, yes.
Elijah Edwards,
Elijah Edwards, yes.
Kathy Gunn,
Kathy Gunn, yes.
Amber Snell,
Amber Snell, yes.
Julian Vasquez-Heilig,
Julian Vasquez-Heilig, yes. Thank you.
Vice Chair Weidman,
Sarah Weidman, yes.
Chair Mitchell.
Justin Mitchell, yes.
Voting is complete.
Thank you, Ms. Chesser, and the motion passes. I believe at this time, unless I'm missing something, I believe it is now time to adjourn. And I believe we might need to vote on that, I believe. So at this time, I'll need a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to
I make
adjourn.
a motion that we adjourn.
Ms. Snell, I have the motion, and Ms. Gunn, I have your second. The motion before the board is to adjourn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Chester, please call the roll.
Amanda Ellis,
Amanda Ellis, yes.
Diane Berry,
Diane Berry, yes.
Elijah Edwards,
Elijah Edwards, yes.
Kathy Gunn,
Kathy Gunn, yes.
Amber Snell,
Amber Snell, yes.
Julian Vasquez Haley,
Julian Vasquez Heilig, yes.
Vice Chair Weedman,
Sarah Weidman, yes.
Chair Mitchell.
Justin Mitchell, yes.
Voting is complete.
All right, we are now adjourned, and technology, you can